Social media is filled with experts telling you to eat this, don't eat that. But is cutting out certain foods really going to help you get pregnant? Let's talk about it. Hey, I'm Whitney, fertility dietitian and coach, and I help busy women get out of the Google spiral and get pregnant. I've helped hundreds of women figure out their fertility so they can grow the family of their dreams. And you better bet, as a nutrition pro with over 10 years of experience in the field, I have a lot of opinions when it comes to food. Today I'm going to break down some of the issues I see with the current research and what you really need to know if you are ready to get pregnant. And as always, this video is meant for educational purposes only and not meant to be a replacement for medical advice. So before we dive into the foods to cut out or what to add, what to take away, let's take a look at where these recommendations are coming from and where some of, I'm sure, your frustration, I know it's my frustration, stems from. So when we actually look at research studies, the structure of these studies, the gold standard when it comes to studies is a double-blind, placebo, randomized control trial test. There's no one that's going to do this when it comes to fertility and pregnancy because no governing body is going to approve a study that could possibly harm a mother or a fetus or an infant. And so a lot of the research that, the guidelines that we get when it comes to pregnancy or fertility, conception, postpartum, all of those come from what they call observational data. So they'll take a group of people and they'll observe a trend in that group, and they'll draw conclusions based on that. And the very first topic I want to get into today is the caffeine debate. Caffeine is a question I get often when it comes to conception, fertility, pregnancy, all of that. I get it in my DMs, my emails, my one-to-one appointments. Should you cut back or cut out caffeine to improve fertility? And this recommendation was actually created from one of those observational studies. So researchers looked at a group of women, had them do they call it a food frequency questionnaire. How many times a day are you drinking coffee, tea, any caffeine? And they totaled it up. And then they noticed trends later on. So is this linked with fertility issues? Is it linked with conception issues? Anything like that. Researchers found that women who drank a higher amount of caffeine tended to also experience higher pregnancy risk, specifically miscarriage. And so they connected the dots and they said, okay, so we know that, even though they don't really know, we see that higher caffeine intake can lead to miscarriage, so women should limit their caffeine intake. The problem with this is, and I think this is a very important thing to know if you are listening to these recommendations, they don't account for any other variables. So women who drink a lot or consume quite a bit of caffeine also tend to have a lot of fatigue. Fatigue could be a root cause issue. They also tend to correlate with poor sleep habits. Maybe night shift work, smoking and caffeine tend to go together. There are other lifestyle habits that go along with caffeine that were not accounted for when they made this recommendation. And so I call it a gray recommendation. So I don't want to ignore it. As a fertility practitioner, I'm looking at all recommendations, but I'm not looking at it as black and white, like yes or no. This is a trend. And with that said, I always say I can never tell when you're going to get pregnant. I can't wave a magic wand and make it happen. I can only help you prepare for pregnancy. So with that said, it could be a month, it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be a year or more, depending on what's going on with you and your hormones and your health. And so if you are making a large lifestyle habit, like cutting out caffeine altogether, and I'm going to get into some more in a little bit, I want to make sure that it's a habit that you can stick with long term, a habit that's not stressing you out, a habit that's not making you feel isolated or restricted or frustrated or angry. And so with caffeine specifically, there's been no research to show that cutting out caffeine completely is going to benefit your fertility. So instead of these broad overarching recommendations, I suggest checking in with your body. How do you feel after you drink caffeine? Do you feel jittery? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel like you can't sleep? Is it impacting your energy levels? I like to go on a case-by-case basis rather than just saying you have to avoid it altogether. How do you feel after you drink a caffeinated beverage? If you feel any of those things, if you're feeling jittery or anxious or can't sit still, that's probably an indicator that your body has had more than it needs. If you feel okay after a cup of coffee though, and you're able to go throughout your day and it doesn't really impact you that much, there's a good chance that your body is handling that well. So I suggest checking in with yourself, see how you feel after you drink a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. That just go based on your own feelings and what your body is telling you. Let me know in the comments, have you tried to cut back caffeine since trying to conceive? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. The second most common question I get is sugar. How much should I have? Should I cut it out altogether? What do you do with it? There's a lot of conflicting evidence, a lot of different blog posts, a lot of different podcasters that are saying a lot of different things about sugar. And I want you to know that sugar is not just the things that you're finding in cookies and candies and high sugar beverages. It's also naturally occurring. We see sugar in fruits, it's in vegetables, there's sugar in grains. So it's not just this enemy from the candy companies that I want you to know about. It's the other things. And we know based on research that high sugar intake over a long period of time, I'm not just talking about like one trip to the fair this summer, I'm talking about long term, you're eating high sugar foods all the time, can lead to high blood sugar levels and high insulin levels. And those two things right there can impact your fertility. So high insulin and high blood sugar tends to lead to hormone imbalance. It can impact your egg quality. It can also increase your overall systemic inflammation and your chances of autoimmune disease in the future. So this isn't something that we want to ignore. We know that high sugar intake over a long period of time can be a problem. But if you remember from my previous mention, I don't know how long it's going to take you to get pregnant. So for me to say, hey, I want you to cut out sugar, that means all of the things that I just talked about, not only just the cookies and candies, but the natural stuff too. And that is not my MO. I want to increase the variety in your diet as much as possible and increase your egg quality and your hormone production as well. So what I would recommend, instead of trying to cut out sugar altogether, is to make sure that if you're consuming something that has high sugar content, try to consume something with protein and or fat with it. Protein and fat are two macronutrients that tend to take a long time to digest. They have very strong bonds and it takes a long time for your stomach acid to break down the bonds, the enzymes to react to it. And they tend to keep us, not only, they help balance out our sugar, but they help keep us full for a longer time. If you eat a pack of Skittles, your stomach is gonna digest those Skittles really quick because it's primarily made of sugar, and it's gonna spike your blood glucose a lot. And it's gonna happen within about 20 minutes. If you have a little bit of fat or protein with that, so let's say you have some avocado, I know this is a weird combination, some avocado with those Skittles, or a deli roll up with like turkey and cheese, that's gonna slow down the digestive process and slow the release of sugar into your bloodstream. So ultimately it's gonna help balance out your blood sugars a little bit better naturally and help keep you fuller longer. So it's a real win-win. Rather than cutting out entire food groups or entire, well, sugar is more than a food group, but entire macronutrient groups, I recommend trying to pair things so that it balances out your hormones naturally and it can increase the variety of foods that you're able to eat and still support your fertility. The third thing I get the most questions about is alcohol. Should you cut it out? Should you not cut it out? And I think I might surprise you with this one. I don't recommend cutting it out.
What did you say?
Alcohol is one of those. There are no health benefits to drinking alcohol for conception. Definitely not for pregnancy. They don't recommend any alcohol while you're pregnant. But should you cut it out while you're trying to conceive as well? I personally don't recommend it for my clients, because what I see is that the more you limit yourself, the more you restrict yourself, the more you isolate yourself, the higher your chronic stress levels get, and chronic stress and fertility do not mix. It's a bad combination. And so instead of cutting something out altogether, if alcohol is part of your social fabric, if it's how you get together with your friends, if it's how you are socializing and it's something that you do on a regular basis, instead of cutting it altogether, I would just recommend cutting back. So moderate drinking for females would be 1 to 2 drinks 1 to 2 times a week. For men, it's 2 to 3 drinks 2 to 3 times a week. And I recommend hydrating plenty. And also, while you're at it, supporting your liver health and gut health to make sure that your body is metabolizing the alcohol as it's coming in. I know I go against the grain on this one based on what I've seen from a lot of other fertility practitioners, but I hesitate to go black and white when it comes to fertility recommendations or food recommendations for fertility, because you are a complex person. Your relationship with food, drinks, it's not just fuel. It is how you connect with others. It's your comfort, it's fun, it's enjoyable. And when we are looking at the heart of baby making, joy and pleasure are at the heart of it. And I want to give you as much joy, pleasure, and variety in your life as possible. And so rather than cutting it out, I would recommend just cutting back a little bit and making sure you're hydrating a lot while you're drinking as well, to help make sure your body is in good place. So you may be wondering at this point, so Whit, what do you recommend cutting out? And I would say, to answer that, it depends. I have been in the nutrition business long enough to know that each situation is very individual, and it depends. I personally don't recommend cutting out anything that you don't have to. So if your body's having an allergic reaction to something, or you cannot digest something very well, or you don't feel very well after you eat something, that to me is a sign that that might be a food you want to avoid. But I am always going to hesitate to say across the board you have to do everything the same way, because you are an individual. Your body needs different things. Your lifestyle is different. Your finances, your home, your relationships, everything needs to be taken into account when we start talking about your diet. And this is exactly why I created the Fertile Plate Method Essentials course, because you don't need a diet to get pregnant. You need a formula, a flexible formula that you're going to be able to use in any kind of situation that will work with your lifestyle, your finances, whether you're at Christmas dinner or whether you're at home with your partner. You need a formula that's going to help support your fertility and also bring the most joy and pleasure into your diet possible. If you want more details, check out the link below. That's all we have for our video today. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you are a fellow food and fertility nerd, definitely hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.